You walk into a room full of people who have watched civilizations fall. People who watched Rome crumble. Who were there when Constantinople burned. Who stood in the dark and watched empires get drawn and redrawn like pencil lines in the dirt. They've outlived kings. They've outlived languages. They've outlived the very concept of whatever it was they used to believe in before the world made them into something else. Yeah, you walk into that room full of these old monsters. And you're 23 years old. And the moment your blood touches the ancient stone floor, every single vote in the room disappears. Like it was never there. Like you are the single most dangerous thing that's ever sat down at that table. Not because you're strong. Not because you're old. But because something in the oldest, most fundamental magic of the night decided, completely without your consent, that you matter more than all of them. This is the story of Luca, the youngest representative in the history of the Parliament of Eternal Night. A boy who read too many books, cared too much about people, and somehow ended up holding the entire nocturnal world in his shaking, still too human hands. And the question isn't whether he survives. The question is whether, by the end, he's still someone worth surviving as. Let's talk about the world first. Because context matters. Especially in politics, and make no mistake, what happens in this story is deeply, uncomfortably political. The vampire world is old. Older than the countries we've drawn on maps. Older than most religions. And like every old system that's desperate to stay relevant, it has a structure, has rules, has a parliament. Not a building with marble columns and morning coffee. Not a place with stenographers and voting machines. The Parliament of the Eternal Night is a chamber carved directly from black volcanic stone, buried deep beneath a cathedral that hasn't held a living congregation in 300 years. It only meets during a total solar eclipse, a rare enough event that some of the creatures sitting inside it have only attended 4 or 5 times in their entire immortal lives. Think about what that means for a second. Some of these beings have existed for 1,000 years, and they've only had a chance to change the law of their world a handful of times. Every decision that gets made in that chamber has to carry the weight of decades, maybe centuries, because there won't be another chance to correct a mistake until the sky goes dark again. The pressure in that room is unlike anything most humans can imagine. And the way they vote, this is the part that matters. No ballots. No raised hands. No electronic system that can be hacked. They vote with their blood. Every representative, one by one, approaches a central stone pedestal where the chalice rests. The chalice, capital C because no one who's ever touched it refers to it any other way, is an artifact so old that the clan that supposedly created it no longer exists. It's dark, pitted, unremarkable to look at. The kind of thing you'd walk past in an antique shop without a second glance. But when vampire blood touches it, something happens. The blood doesn't pool. It illuminates. It rises as a fine red mist that swirls through the chamber, binding to the stone, sealing itself into the walls themselves. The Parliament's laws aren't written in books. They're written in the architecture. Every decree, every treaty, every clause is etched into the stone in dried blood that glows faintly if you press your hand to the wall in the dark. It's horrifying, honestly. It's also kind of beautiful in the way that very dark things sometimes are. Each representative steps forward, opens a vein, and speaks their clan's vote aloud. The magic interprets intention. The chalice tallies. The speaker, an ancient creature named Marceline, who has held the position of moderator for so long that some believe she is the Parliament in some essential way, interprets the result and declares the outcome. Has worked this way for centuries. Has never gone wrong. Until Luca. Luca's clan is small. I want you to understand just how small. In a world where the major clans have hundreds, sometimes thousands of members spread across continents, Luca's clan numbers in the dozens. They don't control territory anyone else wants. They don't have ancient alliances that give them leverage. They survive on the margins, taking feeding grounds no one else bothers to claim, keeping quiet, making themselves useful in small ways to whoever happens to need them. They are, in the language of this world, negligible. Their previous representative to the Parliament, the only other one Luca had ever known, disappeared 6 months before the eclipse. No body, no explanation, Just gone. And everyone knows what just gone means in this world. Someone decided the previous representative was an inconvenience. Someone with the power and the patience to make inconveniences disappear tidily. So the clan needed a new representative. Urgently. Nobody wanted to go. I want to dwell on that for a moment because it's important. Nobody wanted to go. Not because they were cowards. Well, not entirely, but because the smart ones had done the math. Whatever killed the last representative was waiting in that chamber. Being the new face from a powerless clan at a parliament surrounded by creatures who've had centuries to practice the art of subtle cruelty is not a survivable assignment. So the choice fell to Luca. Not because he was the best candidate. Not because he had some hidden talent or secret power. He was chosen because he was the least missed if things went wrong. Because he was new enough to the transformation that the elders half convinced themselves he probably wouldn't suffer as much if it came to that. And because in some small and thoroughly unfair corner of their hearts, they hoped that maybe a young face, a harmless-looking one, would slip through the session unnoticed. Luca knew all of this. He packed his things, climbed the staircase beneath the old cathedral on the night of the eclipse, and walked into the Parliament of the Eternal Night with a full understanding that he was, in every practical sense, expendable. He was terrified. He was also, quietly, furious. The chamber was everything the stories said, and somehow still more overwhelming in person. Circular. Massive. The ceiling lost in shadow above the reach of the blood-red lanterns. Thrones of carved stone arranged in a ring around the central pedestal. And in those thrones, creatures that had genuinely forgotten what it felt like to be young or afraid or uncertain about anything. Luca was the last to arrive. They all watched him take his seat. He knew what they were thinking. He could read it in the angle of their bodies, the quality of their silence. It's the specific silence of powerful people encountering something they've dismissed before they've even looked at it properly. The speaker, Marceline, was exactly as described. Tall still, dressed in layers of dark fabric that might have been fashionable at some point in history, Luca hadn't studied carefully enough. Her face was the kind of face that showed nothing. Not because she felt nothing, but because she'd had so much practice at composure that expression had become a conscious choice rather than a reflex. She called the Parliament to order. She read the agenda. There were formalities. There always are, in these things. Procedural niceties that exist to remind everyone present that they are part of a civilized institution, that they are not the animals they privately know themselves to be. Then came the first ritual vote. Minor motion. Territorial boundary adjustments in a region nobody in the room would ever personally visit. The kind of motion that gets put first on the agenda because it's supposed to be easy, because it gets everyone limbered up, because it establishes the rhythm of the session before the real business begins. One by one, the representatives approached the chalice, opened their wrists, let the drops fall, spoke their votes, stepped back. The chalice filled with that swirling red light, beautiful in its way. Then Marceline looked at Luca. His turn. He crossed the chamber on legs he had to consciously command to move. He stood before the chalice. He drew a small blade from his jacket, the traditional implement because even violence has its etiquette here, and he made the cut. His blood fell. And then something happened that had never happened before in the entire history of that chamber. The chalice went dark. Not dim. Dark. Every last trace of the accumulated votes, every drop that every other representative had just contributed, evaporated into red mist that dispersed instantly against the stone walls, leaving nothing. Like hitting delete on 300 years of documentation. Like someone had unplugged the machine. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Luca had ever heard. Marceline's hands, which had been folded neatly in front of her, because she had been watching this vote with the mild attention of someone who already knew the outcome, tightened. Just barely. Just the whitening of knuckles against stone. Everyone saw it. Again, she said, calm as a frozen lake. They voted again. And when Luca's blood touched the chalice, it happened again. The vote disappeared. Every last vote. And in that moment, the room understood something that their pride and their certainty and their centuries of being the most dangerous things in the dark had not prepared them for. This kid, This nobody, this afterthought in someone else's calculations, had just become the most powerful creature in the room. Not because he was strong, because whatever the oldest magic in their world had decided to do, it had decided to do it through him. They suspended the session. What followed was the vampire equivalent of a diplomatic incident, which is to say, everyone was extremely polite, and the threat of violence was present in every single word spoken. Luca was taken to a side chamber. Marceline came alone. No attendants. The Speaker of the Parliament didn't need them. She asked her questions carefully. Who made him? What rituals were performed at his turning? Had his clan made any recent pacts, any bargains, any contact with older magic that might have attached itself to their bloodline? Luca's answers were painfully honest. Because Luca had always been honest, even when it was stupid, even when it cost him. It was the thing about him that his clan found endearing and occasionally maddening. His clan was small. They had no ancient rituals. They had no special lineage. He was chosen because nobody else wanted to go. Marceline listened to all of this with the precise attention of someone filing information for later use. And when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then this, she said finally, is a problem. Not this is dangerous, or this is alarming, or even this is interesting. Just a problem. In the tone of voice she might use for a crack in the chamber ceiling or an inefficient heating system. Luca understood in that moment exactly how little his existence registered to her as a person. He was a malfunction, a variable that needed to be controlled or removed. The question was which one she'd decide on first. Back in the main hall, because they couldn't keep the Parliament suspended indefinitely, because there was business to conduct and an eclipse that wasn't going to last forever, the political courtship began. It happens fast when everyone in the room is calculating. There's no small talk, no warming up period. Everyone who'd spent centuries learning to read a room had read this one the moment Luca's blood hit the chalice. And they'd all reached the same conclusion from different directions. The boy with the veto was the most valuable piece on the board. Rhett came first. Rhett was the kind of immortal who'd never stopped being what he was before the transformation, which in his case had apparently been a warlord of some kind, because that energy was absolutely still present. He was physically enormous, chronologically ancient, and wore his cruelty the way other people wear confidence. Casually, like it had never occurred to him to be embarrassed by it. He sat next to Luca with the easy familiarity of someone claiming territory. You and I, he said. Think about it. Every law they want to pass, you say no. Every power they've accumulated, every decree, every ancient rule protecting their advantages. You can erase it. We burn it all down and we build something new. Something that actually serves. You? Luca asked. Red smiled. The smile of someone who respects the observation without being deterred by it. Everyone who's been kept down by their system, including your clan. Luca didn't answer. Rhett wasn't done. They'll kill you, he added, as an almost friendly afterthought. If you don't align with someone strong enough to protect you, this session ends with your ashes on that floor. I'm offering you survival and power. Not many people in that hall are offering both. He left Luca to sit with that. He wasn't wrong exactly. That was the worst part. The threats came next, wrapped in the specific silk that centuries of practice gives to threats. A creature called Voss, who represented one of the oldest bloodlines in the hall, sat beside Luca with all the energy of someone delivering a weather report. These eclipses, Voss said conversationally. They're rare, but dark places are not. Accidents happen in dark places. We've all seen it. Tragic, really. Are you threatening me? Luca asked. I'm observing, Voss said pleasantly, that powerful ancient forces tend to find equilibrium, one way or another. After Voss came two more. Different approaches. One bribery, one false sympathy, but the same message underneath. You're not safe. You need us. Choose wisely. Luca was starting to feel like a very small fish in a very large and very hungry ocean. And then Seren sat down. Seren, if you'd been walking through that chamber looking for the most powerful person in the room, you would not have landed on Seren. She was old, Older than almost anyone present, actually, though she didn't broadcast this. And she bore the marks of a violence that had happened a very long time ago and never fully healed. A burn that had taken the left side of her face and neck. A way of moving that suggested one of her arms had been broken so many times it had simply decided to stop healing straight. She represented a clan that was nearly extinct. 3 members, including herself. They had no territory, no leverage, no political weight whatsoever. She was, in the calculations of everyone else in the room, irrelevant, which meant she was the only one in the room with absolutely nothing to gain from manipulating Luca, and absolutely nothing to lose by being honest with him. She sat down next to him without preamble. "You're scared," she said. Not a question. Not even particularly sympathetic. Just an accurate observation. "Yes," Luca said. "Good," she said. "You should be. These people have had centuries to practice being exactly as dangerous as they appear. Your instincts are working correctly." She looked at the chamber around them. At the ancient stone, the blood-red lanterns, the gathered creatures watching Luca from a distance with various levels of poorly concealed calculation. "Would you like to know something interesting about what everyone's really afraid of?" she asked. Luca waited. "It isn't your veto," she said. "Not really. What they're afraid of is losing control of the story. This parliament has worked for centuries because everyone agreed to believe it worked. The Chalice was neutral. The laws were binding. The process was sacred." He paused. "Your blood just told them the Chalice is not neutral. That it has opinions, that it has been watching them this whole time and making judgments they never consented to." She let that sink in. "You didn't break their power," she said. "You broke their certainty. And certainty is worth more than power to people who've had both for as long as they have." Saren told him the history. The official version. The parliament was created to end the wars. Before it, the vampire world was chaos. Centuries of brutal conflict between clans that resolved nothing and destroyed everything. The Chalice was created as a neutral arbiter. Blood doesn't lie. Blood can't be forged or falsified. So blood became the mechanism of law. And it worked, and the wars stopped, and here they were. That was the version carved into the stone. Then Saren added the version that wasn't carved anywhere. The Chalice wasn't just an arbiter. It was bound to a principle. One principle, very old, very simple. No law could pass that would destroy the balance of the night entirely. Not equity. Not fairness. Not justice. Just balance. The continued existence of a world complex enough to sustain itself. For centuries, Saren said, the parliament stayed just within that line. There were cruel laws. Unjust ones. Laws that protected the powerful at the expense of everyone else. But none that would break the world completely. She looked at Luca directly. Tonight, the Chalice has decided that it doesn't trust them anymore. Whatever they're planning, it's crossed a line. And you are the mechanism it's chosen to express that distrust. What are they planning? Luca asked, even though some part of him already knew he didn't want the answer. Saren tilted her head slightly. What do powerful people always plan when resources grow scarce and they want to protect their share? He found out later that same night, overhearing a closed-door conversation he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near. The main proposal for this eclipse, the actual reason they'd called this particular parliament, was a law they were calling, in the polished language of people who are very good at making terrible things sound reasonable, a stabilization protocol, which was a lovely way of saying, a culling. The human population was changing, shifting, getting harder to feed from without detection. And in the calculus of the major clans, the simplest solution was to reduce competition, to eliminate the weaker clans, the ones who struggled, who couldn't sustain themselves, who were, in the bloodless logic of resource management, inefficient. Luca's clan was on the list. His entire clan, all few dozen of them, gone on paper before he'd even walked out of this chamber. He sat with that knowledge in the dark for a long time. Long enough that the candles burned lower. Long enough that the fear moved through him and settled somewhere strange. Not into paralysis the way he'd expected, but into something harder and colder. Clarity, maybe. Or something that looked like it from the inside. Here's the thing about power that nobody tells you when you're young and powerless. It's not that the powerful people are smarter. They're not, necessarily. It's that they've had time to learn the rules of the game. The actual rules, not the ones written on the walls. And they've had time to practice playing by them until it looks effortless. Luca didn't have time. What he had was a mind that had spent his entire human life reading, observing, asking questions other people found annoying, and caring deeply about outcomes that didn't directly affect him. He was the kind of person who would research the history of a neighborhood before moving into it, who would want to understand why a system worked the way it worked before accepting that it should. These qualities had not made him particularly popular in his clan, or honestly anywhere else. Now they were the only things standing between his people and extinction. The session reconvened the next evening. Marceline stood at the podium and announced, with a specific careful tone of a navigator plotting around icebergs, that they would conduct some technical tests of the Chalice mechanism before proceeding with the main agenda. Everyone in the room understood exactly what this was. Nobody said so. Minor motions, territorial adjustments, feeding rights in districts nobody seriously cared about. Each one brought to the Chalice, each one resolved cleanly and quickly, because Luca was told, very politely, very firmly, to remain in his seat. He did. The Chalice worked perfectly. The mist rose. The votes tallied. The laws passed into the stone. Marceline's composure eased by perhaps 3%, which on her face looked like a sunrise. And then, nestled between a resolution about nocturnal trade routes and a procedural note about interclan arbitration, a proposal was read aloud. It was long. It used the phrase resource optimization 4 times. It mentioned sustainable population management, in a clause that was buried so deep in the language that you'd need to have read it twice slowly to understand what it was actually authorizing. Luca had read a lot of documents in his human life. He understood immediately. He stood up. Marceline's gaze moved to him. Every head in the chamber turned. He crossed the floor to the Chalice. Nobody stopped him, because the laws of the Parliament protected every representative's right to vote, and because physically stopping him would break a different set of rules that even the creatures in this room weren't willing to openly violate. Not yet. He opened his wrist. His blood fell. The Chalice went dark. And then, for the first time, something else happened. A crack appeared in the stone floor. Not large. Not dramatic. A hairline fracture running from the base of the pedestal to the nearest throne. Like the chamber was exhaling something it had been holding in for a very long time. The session dissolved into exactly the kind of chaos that creatures who have spent centuries cultivating composure are absolutely terrifying to witness when they finally drop it. Rhett was on his feet immediately, calling for something that he was framing as procedural but was clearly the beginning of a physical confrontation. 3 other elders were speaking simultaneously at volumes that, in a room made of echoing stone, turned the chamber into a wall of sound. Marceline stood absolutely still at her podium and said nothing. She was calculating. Luca stood at the Chalice with his bleeding wrist and the growing understanding that there was no version of tonight where he was going to get out of this by being cautious. The Chalice had reacted to a culling law, not to a territorial dispute or a trade route argument, to the specific, direct intention to end his people. The magic of the Parliament, whatever it was, wherever it lived in the old stone and the dried blood on those walls, it had registered what the pretty language was actually saying. And it had said no. Which meant the Chalice wasn't just a vote counter. It was, as Saren had told him, something that watched. Something that had opinions about what constituted a line too far. And apparently, genocide by committee was across that line. The attempt to kill him came from 2 of Rhett's allies, moving through the chaos with the practiced efficiency of people who do this kind of thing regularly. Luca survived it because Saren was already moving before they were, which told him something very interesting about Saren that he filed away for later. Half the chamber physically intervened, not out of concern for Luca specifically, but out of the dawning terror that if the Chalice was already cracking the floor over a procedural vote, What would happen to the Parliament's infrastructure if one of its recognized representatives was murdered inside the chamber itself? Ancient oaths, ancient magic, ancient architecture. The kind of systems that have very specific consequences for violations of their core terms. Nobody wanted to find out what those consequences were from the inside. So Luca lived. And Marceline, who had spent the entire incident precisely where she'd been standing, watching everything with the focused attention of someone who is not panicking because she is too busy understanding, finally raised her hand for silence. She got it. She always got it. "We will recess," she said. "And then the representative from the marginal clans and I will speak privately." She didn't phrase it as an invitation. The offer Marceline put on the table was elegant. She'd had time to construct it properly, and she was very good at what she did. Luca would become, effectively, a permanent institution. Not a representative in any active sense. Between eclipses, he would be kept in a kind of suspension. Not dead, not truly sleeping, but not present in the ongoing life of the vampire world either. A stored mechanism. Failsafe. He would be woken for each eclipse. He would be given the agenda in advance. If anything on that agenda crossed certain extreme thresholds, definitions of extreme to be determined, of course, by the Parliament itself, he would exercise his veto. Otherwise, he would return to suspension until the next eclipse. In exchange, his clan would be formally protected, inviolable under the Parliament's law, for as long as the Parliament stood. It was, she acknowledged, not a life, but it was survival for the people he cared about. And it was a version of purpose. She presented it without apology, because she didn't offer apologies. She offered terms. Luca listened to the whole thing. "You want to put me in a box," he said, "and take me out when you need a veto you can't find another way around." "I want to formalize a mechanism that already exists," Marceline said, "in a way that doesn't destabilize everything we've spent centuries building." "Everything you've built," Luca said. "Not everyone." She didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. Saren found him afterward in one of the corridor alcoves. She didn't say she'd been listening. She didn't need to say it. "She's not wrong that it would protect your people," Saren said. "In the short term. Probably. As long as the Parliament continues to function and Marceline continues to hold her position, and nobody finds a technical workaround that lets them reinterpret what your veto actually covers." "That's a lot of conditions," Luca said. "Yes." Saren was quiet for a moment. Outside the chamber, somewhere far above them, the eclipse was approaching totality. The deepest dark. "If you bind yourself to this system," she said finally, "you become part of it. You give it legitimacy. Everything this Parliament has done, every law that protected the powerful at the expense of everyone else, you put your signature on that when you agree to maintain it. And if I don't take the deal, my people die." "Possibly," Saren said. "Or possibly what needs to die is not you, and not your people. Maybe what needs to die is the Parliament itself." Luca looked at her for a long moment. "You've been waiting a long time to say that," he said. "I've been waiting for someone the Chalice would listen to," she said simply. "It doesn't listen to me. My blood just counts as a vote, same as anyone else's. Same as it always has." She looked at him with those very old, very tired eyes. "But yours does something different. And that means you have a choice that nobody else in that chamber has ever had. You can preserve the system. Or you can do something that frightens me and terrifies them and might be the only honest thing that's happened in that chamber in 300 years. What if it creates chaos?" Luca asked. "What if without the Parliament, the clans just go back to war? What if people die who wouldn't have died under the old system, even the bad version?" "People are dying under the old system," Saren said, not unkindly. "They're dying with nicer language around it." She stood to leave. "I'm not telling you what to do," she said. "I've lived too long to tell anyone what to do. I'm just telling you to be honest with yourself about what you're choosing and why." She paused at the archway. The Chalice reacted to that culling law. But I don't think it was reacting to the policy. I think it was reacting to the fact that the people passing it had stopped believing the story they told themselves about why they were doing it. They're not trying to maintain balance anymore. They're trying to protect what's theirs. The magic can tell the difference. I suspect you can too. The eclipse was reaching totality. You could feel it even underground. A quality of pressure, of held breath, as if the world above had gone very still and very dark and was waiting to see what happened next. Marceline reconvened the parliament for the final session. 2 proposals had been formally put forward, because even in crisis these creatures defaulted to procedure. It was the only language they all shared. Proposal 1. A reform motion. Weaken the Chalice's interpretive function. Reduce its authority over what could and couldn't be voted into law. More efficient, more practical, more controllable. Subtext. Remove the failsafe so the culling can pass next time. Proposal 2. Strengthen the existing mechanism. Formally enshrine the veto as explicit law. Acknowledge the Chalice's role not just as a vote counter but as an arbiter of whether a law should exist at all. Reduce the Parliament's unilateral power in exchange for more durable legitimacy. Subtext. Give the boy with the magic blood a permanent institutional role in exchange for preserving the system's authority. Both sides expected Luca to pick one. Both sides assumed he would be thinking primarily about his clan's safety. Both sides, in their own way, were still not really seeing him. Luca's turn came. He crossed the chamber floor for the last time, and he was thinking about a lot of things as he walked. He was thinking about the document he'd overheard, the culling law, and the way the language had been constructed specifically to make a monstrous thing sound administrative. He was thinking about his clan. Not the abstract version of them that lived in political arguments, but the specific people. Faces. The elder who'd taught him to play chess during his first weeks after the transformation. The young woman who kept a journal in 6 languages because she didn't want to forget the ones she'd spoken in previous centuries. He was thinking about what Saren had said. About honesty. About what the Chalice was actually responding to. He was thinking about what he would become if he walked out of this chamber having chosen safety over truth. How long he could live inside that choice before it became the only thing he knew how to be. He stood at the Chalice. He opened his wrist. And then he didn't stop. He cut deeper than the ritual required. Much deeper. The blood came fast and heavy, pooling in the stone basin in a way that made several of the elders shift uncomfortably in their thrones, because it was too much, because it was not the controlled, measured contribution of a political representative, but something rawer than that. He spoke. Not a vote, not a legal clause, not a proposal or a counter-motions or an alignment with either faction. Confession. His voice was steady. He'd been surprised to find that, when it mattered, he could be steady. Maybe that was the transformation. Maybe it was just him. My clan has killed to survive, he said. I have killed since the transformation. Not because we were ordered to, not because a law required it, but because we were afraid and hungry and we made choices that we don't fully have to live with because we never had to look them in the face. The chamber was absolutely silent. This parliament passed laws that made those choices easier to not look at, he continued. That's what it was built for, I think, eventually. Not to stop the wars. The wars stopped because everyone was exhausted. It was built to give everyone in this room a structure to hide behind. To be able to say, the law permitted this or the law required this instead of, I wanted this or I chose this. He looked up. The assembled parliament looked back at him. Marceline's face was, for the first time in the evening, genuinely unreadable. Not composed. Unreadable. There was a difference. I'm terrified of you, Luca said. Every single one of you. And I'm terrified of what I'm becoming. And I think the Chalice isn't reacting to the laws. I think it's reacting to the fact that nobody in this room believes what they're saying anymore. You're not trying to maintain a world. You're trying to preserve your position in it. And that's different. The blood in the basin began to change color. Not red. Darker. Something close to black. A deep arterial shadow that pulsed like something alive. I don't know what happens next, Luca said. I don't know if taking away your structure creates chaos or creates space. I suspect it creates both. And I suspect that's uncomfortable. And I think uncomfortable might be what the truth actually feels like when you've been avoiding it long enough. He met Marceline's eyes. I won't take the deal. I won't be your stored veto. And I won't vote for either proposal. Then what? Rhett said very quietly. Do you think you're doing? Luca looked at the chalice. At the dark blood swirling within it. I think I'm letting it decide, he said. Chamber shook. That's the only word for it. Not an earthquake, something more specific than that. More intentional. The vibration of something very old deciding that enough was enough. Stone sigils that had been carved into the walls for centuries. Laws, decrees, the accumulated legislation of a world's worth of political maneuvering began to fracture. Not all at once, one by one, and then in clusters, the dried blood that held them cracking and falling as a fine crimson dust. 3 of the elders simply weren't anymore. Happen quickly. A brightness, too fast to look at directly, and then empty thrones. The ancient oaths that had bound their extended existence together. Promises made to the Parliament, debts owed to its system, the fundamental contract of their place in the nocturnal world, dissolved, and without those oaths, certain things that had been sustained solely by the willingness of the magic to sustain them ceased to be sustained. Nobody moved to help them. Nobody moved at all. The eclipse reached totality above them. There was a moment, just a moment, of complete darkness. Not the comfortable managed dark of the blood-red lanterns, but genuine darkness, the kind that has existed since before anything alive had eyes to see it. No moon, no stars, no lanterns because the lanterns went out. Just voices and fear, and the sound of stone deciding what it was going to be when the light came back. And then the eclipse passed. Not completely, the moon was still half-shadowed, but light returned. Pale and uncertain and new-looking. The way light always looks when you've been in the dark long enough to remember what dark actually is. The chamber was smaller than it had been. Not literally, the dimensions were the same. But something about it had contracted. The grandeur was gone. The sense of absolute authority that had lived in the stone and the lanterns and the thrones. It had cracked like the floor, and what was left was just a room. Impressive, yes. Old certainly. But a room made by creatures, not by inevitability. Several thrones were empty. The chalice, the ancient chalice, the one that had sat on that pedestal longer than any nation currently on any map, was gone. In its place, a simple stone basin, rough, unmarked, the kind of thing you might find in a garden or a courtyard. Plain, functional, permanent in the way that humble things are permanent, rather than the way that grand things try to be. Luca stood at the pedestal with his wrist healed. The transformation handled that quickly, and looked out at what remained of the Parliament of the Eternal Night. The surviving elders looked back at him. The specific fear on their faces was a new one. Not the fear of loss or death or pain. The fear of consequence in a world that had just lost its system for managing consequences. The fear of being responsible for your choices in a way that a structure can no longer absorb for you. The fear of a world where what you do matters and you can't hide behind the law to avoid knowing that. Nobody said anything for a long time. Marceline was still standing at her podium. Course she was. She was the kind of creature who would outlast the building falling down around her through sheer habit of posture. She looked at Luca for a long moment. You've dismantled the only thing preventing open war, she said. I've dismantled the only thing preventing anyone from having to look at the choices they're making, Luca said. The war was already in the room. It was just wearing formal clothes. She considered that. He couldn't tell what she concluded. What happens now, she asked, is on you. No, he said. That's the thing. That's the thing the Parliament was built to avoid acknowledging. What happens now is on all of us. On each individual choice each of us makes. Not on a law. Not on an institution. On us. He walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. He went home. That might sound anticlimactic after everything, and maybe it is, a little. But there's something honest about it too. He didn't claim a throne he hadn't wanted. He didn't stay in the ruins and make a speech about the new world. He went home to his people, the small group of them, the few dozen who'd sent him because nobody else wanted to go. And he told them what had happened. Not the political summary. The real version. The fear. The blood. The darkness at totality. The elders turning to ash over sins the Parliament had been absorbing for centuries. The chalice going dark and then just not being there anymore. He told them about Saren. About Marceline. About Rhett. He told them that the culling law was gone because there was no parliament to pass it. That their protection under the old system was gone for the same reason. They can still come for us, he said. If they want to. But they'll have to own it. There's no law telling them they have to. No law protecting them when they do. Whatever happens next happens because someone chose it. One of the elders of his clan, older than Luca by several centuries but still young enough to find the distinction uncomfortable, asked, "Is that better? Or just different?" Luca thought about that for a long time. "I think it's truer," he said finally. "I think it's closer to what's actually there. And I think when things are true, you can deal with them. You can respond to them. You can make actual decisions instead of managing a system that was already making the decisions for you. And if other clans decide the decision they want to make is to erase us, then we form alliances. Real ones. Based on shared stakes, not shared laws. Find the other small clans. The ones the culling list was meant for. Because we're not the only ones who just got delisted from a massacre. It wasn't a guarantee. He knew that. They knew it too. But a real uncertainty is different from a false certainty. A real uncertainty leaves room for something to be done about it. In the ruins of the Parliament, Saren sat alone. She'd stayed after the others left. She sat in the empty hall and she breathed the air that smelled of stone and old blood and something new. Something she'd almost forgotten the scent of. Possibility. She walked to the pedestal where the chalice had been and looked at the plain stone basin that had replaced it. She dipped one finger into it. Water. Cold, clear water. Whatever the chalice had been, whatever ancient mechanism or concentrated will had lived inside it, was gone. What remained was just a container, waiting to be useful in whatever way something simple and honest could be useful. She looked at the empty thrones. She'd watched empires fall before. It was always this same strange combination of devastation and relief. The relief that comes when something rotten finally collapses, even if the collapse is painful, even if the wound left behind is deep and will take a long time to close. She'd always wondered if she would live to see the Parliament end. She had. She wasn't sure what she'd thought she'd feel. What she actually felt was tired, in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with having carried something heavy for a very long time. And underneath the tired, something cautious and tentative that she hadn't experienced in so many centuries she'd almost forgotten it had a name. Hope maybe. Or the precondition for it. The small, vulnerable acknowledgement that tomorrow might not be identical to today. That the night might belong to choices instead of certainties. Terrified her. She suspected that was appropriate. So what do we take from this? Because this is a vampire story, yes, but it's always, when you look at it closely enough, a story about systems. About the institutions we build and what we build them to do. About the difference between a structure that serves its stated purpose and one that has evolved, over time, into a structure that primarily serves the people already inside it. It's a story about the specific comfort of being able to say, "The rules say so," and the specific terror of a world where the rules don't say so anymore and you have to figure out what you actually believe. It's a story about a person who was never supposed to matter, in a room full of people who had decided who mattered a long time ago, and what happens when the universe, or the magic, or the architecture, or just the accumulated weight of accumulated choices, decides to disagree. Luca didn't become a king. He didn't get a throne or a title or a formal acknowledgement that he'd been right about anything. He got to go home. He got to look his people in the eye and tell them the truth about what had happened. He got to be, for the first time since he'd been turned, not expendable. Not because the system had granted him value, but because he'd stopped accepting the system's valuation as the only one that counted. And the night, the long, dark, ancient, terrifying night, well, the night kept going. always does. What's different is what gets done inside it. That's the Parliament of Eternal Night. A story about blood and law and the specific, quiet bravery of telling the truth in a room full of people who have built careers on not having to. If you want more stories like this, dark, political, intimate, the kind of fantasy that uses the impossible to talk about the very real, make sure you're subscribed and let me know in the comments which element of this world you'd most want explored further. Personally, I want more Saren. I think Saren has been waiting to talk for a very long time. Until the next one, stay curious, stay honest, and maybe double check what your blood is actually saying before you put it in a chalice.